The story is based on American writer Hugh Howey's novel series of the same name. Silo is a post-apocalyptic dystopian drama, in which a governed society lives inside a silo, in which everyone is barred from going outside, and into the ruins of the toxic world that remains. No historical data on Earth existed before the silo came into being. How did it lead to this? And why is no one allowed to go and find out what's outside? What happened to Earth? The answers lie within Silo. No one knows who built the silo, only that it is supposed to keep the people inside thriving, locked away from the outside world, which turned toxic and is in ruins. Sheriff Halston walks into Holding 3. A minute later, his subordinate and friend, Deputy Sam Marnes, finds him there. He sees Halston staring at the wasteland on the screen. A devastated landscape lies before him, along with a dead body. Before Sam could stop him, Halston breaks the cardinal law of the silo, and says that he wants to go out. Once made by anyone in the silo, this request needs to be fulfilled, but it is irrevocable. Spoilers ahead. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Alison and Halston are finally granted clearance for childbearing for a year. Both are relieved and couldn't be happier. Their family is about to be complete. They are having breakfast at the cafeteria, and it seems that everyone around them knows that they are going to have a baby and is very happy about it too. That's when an old woman named Gloria approaches them and tells Alison, much to Halston's disgust, that she offers fertility counseling, which Alison will find helpful. Halston doesn't like Gloria for some reason, and would rather have her leave his wife alone. Gloria thus leaves. Halston tells Alison that Gloria is a fraud. We have to wait to see what caused this rift between them. Later, Alison gets her birth control pill, which is more like a small metal device removed by Dr. Leonard. She is finally ready to conceive. Days pass. Alison is in her office with her friend Karen. One day when their boss Bernard comes and tells her that he has taken down her article on recovering deleted files. She needs his approval before posting such articles. Later on, Alison asks Halston that if rebels erased history, what makes it wrong to question it? If they regret losing their past, why is it not allowed to look for any relic that may remain in the mines? Halston tells her that the pact is the only history. If anyone decides to go outside the silo to know more, it will be the death of everyone. Halston is responsible for making sure nobody goes out. Who are these rebels Alison mentions? Where are these mines that apparently contain relics from the past? Silo's Freedom Day is knocking on the door. Childbearing days are down to 157, and Alison still isn't pregnant despite their trying. Gloria finds her and brings her home, asking if she thinks it was the rebels who erased historical data or someone else. Maybe the same people also don't want her to bear a child. Alison shares Gloria's opinion with Halston, who, as expected, believes that Gloria has gone crazy. He reassures her that they should be positive about the baby because they have clearance. There is no other way about it. Freedom Day is here. Halston is with Mayor Ruth Johns, who is going to give a speech on the occasion. Alison is supposed to visit a guy named George Wilkins, who has yet again called her company for a repair request on his machine. Alison arrives at George's place, and he shows her an old hard drive, a relic as per the judicial pertaining to her article on recovering lost data. The drive's memory is almost full, although there seems to be no data visible, which means it's hidden. Also, as per George, the drive is more than 140 years old. In other words, it is from before the rebellion occurred that led to the deletion of history. After spending hours researching how to recover whatever is on it, Alison manages to crack it using a code engraved on the drive itself. The data includes a lot of information on the silo, including its blueprints. This is potentially dangerous, and if the judicial system finds out, they can have George killed if not sent out to the wasteland. Alison tells him to get rid of the drive immediately and leaves. George, however, continues exploring the blueprint of the silo and finds a tunnel at the bottom level that is separated from the levels above by concrete. The information is stated as classified. The next day, she tells Karen that she isn't feeling well and uses the excuse to visit Gloria and find out what she has to say. She then returns home and tells Halston that she will be taking the next day off and going to the market. Halston is lost in thoughts about his wife and wonders if she is doing okay. The next day, Alison visits George to find out more about Silo from the drive. They go through a lot of stuff, but it's the last file that leaves Alison utterly flabbergasted. She sees footage of green trees, blue skies, and things flying in the air. She returns home that night and goes to sleep without speaking much to Halston. Alison's childbearing days are over. Halston and Dr. Leonard are waiting for her, as she's supposed to come there from work. After waiting for quite some time, Halston goes to her office and finds that she called in sick. He returns home and finds Alison in a bloodied state. She shows her the birth control pill that she has just cut out of her abdomen. This means that what Dr. Leonard did a year ago was a hoax. The enforcers of the pact, which brought about the existence of the silo, don't want anyone to conceive babies, because they need obedient people who will listen to them. Halston rushes to bring Dr. Leonard, and they are on their way back when Halston bumps into Sam, who tells him that Alison is in the cafeteria. He arrives there and finds Alison trying to explain to the people how they are being deceived by those with power. It is a beautiful world outside, but they are not letting anyone out. Before Halston can calm her down, she declares that she wants to go out. Sam cuffs her and takes her to a holding facility. Her wish, which is no less than a crime inside the silo, or so it seems, has to be fulfilled. It is more like a punishment for going against the authorities and the rules of the place. Gloria and George are both interrogated, but nothing substantial is found in their testimonies. They do not find anything from George's place either. He must have hidden the drive somewhere safe. Halston meets Alison in her cell. She tells him that the screens show only what the enforcers want people to see. If they see nothing, they know nothing. If they know nothing, they won't ask anything. She intends to find out what's outside, and once she does, she will come back for him. Halston could not be more worried. Alison is finally dressed up, in a suit and a helmet, in front of her husband, Halston, Mayor Ruth Jones, and Sam. Once outside the airlock, she is outside the laws of Silo as well. Halston reads the oath to Alison with tears in his eyes. Alison's last words are, "I love you." She walks out into the wasteland. People in the silo cheer as they watch Alison, via the large screen in the cafeteria, come out on the other side. Halston watches tearfully as his wife treads away from the silo and soon collapses to the ground. Alison is dead. Mayor Jones and Sam break down. George walks out of the cafeteria, saddened, along with the rest of the people. 2 years later, Halston is in his office when Sam walks in and informs him that George Wilkins has been found dead in level 120. But the catch is that an engineer on that level thinks that George was murdered. Upon examining his body a day later, down at level 120, Halston and Sam find a wound in his head. However, the engineer who told Sam that George was killed is absent. Hank, the guy from the sheriff's department, who showed them George's body, brings them to the engineer, who is working further down in the generator room. Her name is Juliet Nichols. Halston is inside holding 3. He is speaking to Sam, who has pulled a chair and tells him that even if it really is Alison, whom they have seen lying dead outside for more than 2 years now, he has decided to go out there and find the truth that she intended to look for. Who are the enforcers? What exactly is the pact? Where is the mine that Alison mentions that is supposed to contain relics from the past? Where does the tunnel at the bottom of the silo lead to? Who killed George? Is this a sign that someone doesn't want anyone to find out what's beyond the silo? What did Juliet tell Halston that ultimately made him decide to go outside in search of the truth, just like Alison? Silo, despite having the very common search for truth in a dystopian society plot, moves at a steady pace. We can tell that there's more outside than the people in the silo think. Silo episode 1 has established this fact pretty well, and that there is something that the people with power don't want the common folk to find out. However, we do not get any sign of things being limited, which should be the case. They do not have much space to grow crops. So where does all the food come from? Where do they store the water, and where does it come from? How big is the silo, really? It is painful to see how Alison addresses birds as things flying in the sky. This makes it clear that she and the others as well have never seen birds in their lives. So, we can assume that nature is something that is missing from their lives. Hopefully, as the show proceeds, we will find out more about Silo, and how it has been able to keep its residents in the dark about the outer world. Episode 1 of Silo ended with Sheriff Halston Becker meeting engineer Juliet Nichols, who believes that George was murdered. Fast forward 2 years and Halston has decided to go out and look for the same truth that his wife Alison died searching for. Let's see what he finds outside. Mayor Ruth Jones reads the oath to Halston before he can step outside the silo. 2 guys fix their helmets in position, and a sad Deputy Sam Marnes opens the airlock, bidding his dear friend a final goodbye. The hatches separate, and dust and sunlight fall on the face of Sheriff Halston Becker. Juliet Nichols watches, along with her peers, on a screen as Halston walks out onto the wasteland. Halston can see the blue sky, the lush greenery, and the birds in the air. Alison was right. The people need to see what Silo has been keeping them from. He walks over to the camera that is sending the footage to all the screens and cleans the lens. He then starts walking toward Alison's lifeless body. As he approaches her, the poison hits. He is unable to breathe and takes off his helmet. He collapses and somehow drags himself beside Alison before turning still. Halston thus breathes his last beside his wife. Juliet is frustrated and goes down to the generator chamber and starts screaming at the top of her voice. All the work goes to waste. Sam is in his office. After telling his assistant to go home for the day, he opens a note left by Halston. In it, Halston nominates Juliet Nichols as the next sheriff. He visits Mayor Ruth Johns and asks if she has decided who she will make the new sheriff. She hasn't. She has been going through the ledgers maintained by the mayors before her to learn more about the time before the rebellion and what led to it. She fears instability among the people, especially now that there is no sheriff to keep things under control. People have already begun buying hammers and pipes for security. It is curious why Sam doesn't show her Halston's letter. What could be the reason for it? 3 months have passed since George's death. This means that it has been 3 months since Halston's death too. This makes the total duration between Alison's death and that of Halston's 2 years, 3 months, approx. Juliet is with Martha Walker at the latter's workshop. She tells Martha that Halston lied to her. George, with whom she was in a relationship, wanted to show her something. One day, after work, she visits George's place and finds a note mentioning a location, and that he has found what he was looking for. Later on, she finds out from one of her peers that George was found dead. It was apparently a suicide. She is in shock and tells Hank that it is murder. The next day, while she is working in the generator room, Hank brings in Sheriff Halston Becker and Deputy Sam Marnes. Hank brings them to the spot where George's body was discovered at 3 a.m. It looked like George had fallen to his death. Halston and Juliet then arrive at the morgue. Halston tells Sam to contact dispatch and see if the porters saw anything in the middle of the night. Halston checks George's wrists to see if he tried to slit them. He asks if she can identify anything by looking at George's body, but she is too shaken to say anything. Sam and Hank arrive a few minutes later. Sam informs Halston that no porters were around that night. Hank tells them that the judiciary will soon be coming for a briefing on the suicide. In the cafeteria, Halston asks Juliet why she didn't get sanctioned by George. He guessed that she and George were together, but how? She doesn't tell him anything but takes him straight to George's place and shows him the note. However, it is torn. Only the first part mentioning the location is visible. Juliet has torn off the part where George states that he has found what he was looking for but lies to Halston, saying that what he sees is all George left. She then takes him to the lowest level of the silo. She removes the board with a warning sign, and she and Halston enter a dark passageway. Juliet and Halston make their way down a set of steps and arrive in a huge chamber. She turns on the lights and reveals what she thinks is the machine that built the silo. They head down further to the base of the digger, and Juliet shows Halston the small workshop that George had built there. She brings out a box full of relics, including a camcorder, a tennis cork, and a Statue of Liberty figurine. Juliet reveals that George used to visit the place and search for something, although he didn't know what. She then follows a wire by pulling at it, which she knows is connected to something. The wire brings her and Halston to the edge of a metal platform, underneath which is a water body. She keeps pulling, and up comes a bag inside, which has a hard drive and printouts of an article on how to recover lost data. Halston recognizes his wife's handwriting on the back of the document. That's when Halston tells Juliet that Alison did some work for George a few days before she went out. He has met George only once. Juliet thus realizes that Halston could guess that she and George were dating because he had seen the watch she was wearing on George's wrist. That's why he checked George's wrists at the morgue. This is why Halston followed Juliet, i.e., to find out if George had something to do with Alison going outside. Halston will have to tell the court that George's death was an accident, but Juliet is against it. She knows he was murdered, and maybe the drive will reveal why. After much convincing, Halston agrees to find out more about George's death and see what's in the drive, but only if she keeps quiet about it and stops wearing George's watch, which might just catch someone's eye and raise suspicion. If and when he finds something, he will send her a signal. Juliet waited and waited, and now Halston is gone. As soon as Halston leaves, Juliet lets Martha check the other half of the note that she didn't show Halston. George was looking for something more dangerous than a relic. Martha tells her to be careful because things are getting dangerous. Juliet leaves. Sam arrives at Mayor Ruth Jones's office and hands her a file containing the names of 4 candidates for the sheriff's position. She still has no idea who the right person will be. That's when Sam reads Halston's note to her. Ruth has no idea why Halston wanted Juliet Nichols, an engineer, to be the next sheriff. She decides to see her. Juliet is in George's workshop at the base of the digger. A look at the ropes lying nearby reminds her of the time they were both down here, and George told her about a door that lies at the end of a tunnel at the bottom of the water under the digger. She had told him that she wanted him to tell her about it only after he had found it and come back. But now, with neither George nor Halston to help her, she decides to look for the tunnel at the bottom on her own. She puts on a headlamp, ties the rope to the bolts at the edge of the platform over the water body, and uses it to climb down to the surface of the water. She is almost at the bottom when she slips but manages to prevent herself from falling. However, she loses her headlamp due to the jerk, and it falls and drowns in the water right beneath her. It is dark, and she is now stuck. Silo episode 2 ends with Juliet hanging on a rope in the dark with water beneath her. She can either climb all the way up or let go and fall into the water. The former seems like a better option, no matter how hard, because no one knows what's lurking in the dark waters. George's drive is missing. It is supposed to be with Halston. He must have seen something in the drive that made him decide to go outside. As for Juliet, we have no idea what her plan of action is. We do not know what Halston told the judicial about George or what they told him. It is possible that they confiscated the drive. Silo episode 3 will hopefully shed light on the matter. Silo doesn't waste a second establishing characters by giving each of them their own stories. Instead, it follows the plot and lets us decide who we want to trust. Also, a steady pace is maintained throughout, just like in Silo episode 1, and it holds onto our attention right till the very end and leaves us wondering what will happen next. While we are yet to understand how the silo runs and who the judicial is, the mystery of what lies outside the silo is still more urgent. Juliet reached the waters at the bottom of the digger, intending to find out whatever George believed was under the water. Meanwhile, Sam has just handed Halston's note to Mayor Ruth, nominating Juliet as the next sheriff. Silo episode 3 shows whether Juliet wants to be the sheriff and if she is worthy of it. Juliet somehow pulls herself out of the darkness. With alcohol in one hand and George's watch in the other, she goes into a trance, drinking, wondering about George, and crying to herself. She is woken up later by Knox's assistant and feels Silo shaking. Something is wrong. She arrives in the generator room, after which she punches Cooper, a junior, out of her way and gets inside the hatch to fix the vibration. Once she is done, Knox, head of mechanical, reminds her that she cannot behave in whatever way she wants. Juliet tells him that the rotor is shattering, and they need to turn off the generator and fix it if they want to avoid a catastrophe. Knox is against it because he knows how chaotic it can be if the silo goes dark even for an hour. He tells her to go home, get sober, and they will talk about it the next day. Mayor Ruth Johns and Deputy Sam Marnes meet Bernard, head of IT department in Silo. They are meeting to talk about the next sheriff, and Ruth asks Bernard about Juliet Nichols. Bernard brushes her away, saying that she is a thief who stole tape from IT department. He suggests that Paul Billings is the better candidate for the position of sheriff, and she needs to make the decision quickly, because people are already taking up arms to protect themselves in case there is a compromise in law and order. Ruth and Sam then meet the common folk, reassure them, and make them understand how they need to be together. It is evident that they all love her and have already decided to vote for her in the next election. After talking to them, Ruth and Sam visit Dr. Pete Nichols, who is Juliet's father. He is also the one looking after the newborns in the silo. They ask why Juliet, despite being the child of a doctor, ended up in the mechanical department. Pete gives them the most logical explanation. Juliet always had a knack for fixing things. She was just 13 years old when she left him, and it's been quite a while since Pete spoke to his daughter. Juliet is with Martha at her workshop. She tells her about George and his clues and that she is angry at herself. But when Martha tries to reassure her, she snaps back. Martha can never know how Juliet feels because she has never even stepped outside her workshop. At least not for the last 20 years. Under Judge Meadows' orders, Sims, head of security, approaches Ruth and Sam, and he, too, like Bernard, tries to make her understand how Paul Billings is a much better pick for the sheriff position. But Ruth is adamant and tells Sims that she will decide who will be the sheriff only after her trip is over. A vibration of the railings as Juliet rests against them tells her that the rotor is malfunctioning again. Everyone rushes inside the mechanical room. Knox is overlooking the entire situation when Ruth and Sam are ushered into the engine room by Hank. Then Juliet arrives and tells everyone to stop talking so that she can listen to the rotor's sounds and identify what's malfunctioning. She heads inside the hatch again and manages to prevent another disaster. Ruth meets Juliet and tells her that she has been chosen by the deceased Sheriff Halston to be the next sheriff. But Juliet shakes her head. She needs to take care of the generator more than anything else. Ruth gives her Halston's badge, and she and Sam leave. Later on, as Juliet is talking about it with Knox and the others in the core mechanical team, Hank asks Juliet if he can see the badge. He shows her something engraved on its back. Juliet sees it, and the next thing we know, she rushes after Ruth, catches up to her, and tells her that she is ready to become the sheriff only if she is allowed to fix the generator. For this, it needs to be shut down. The backup is barely enough for life support, but it has to be done, otherwise, there will only be the backup to rely on, and that's not feasible. An 8-hour power outage is thus declared, during which the silo will be in complete darkness. There is probably a dent in the rotor blades that needs to be fixed. Knox's team needs to open the generator and fix the blades. For this, they need to pause the steam flow that powers the generator. The containment chamber protects the turbine from a sudden surge in the flow of steam. If they want to turn off the generator, they have to close the valve that links the steam pipe to the containment chamber. Once they do that, they will have 30 minutes before the steam gathers enough heat, and the valve needs to be opened again. Not doing it will result in an explosion that will blow up the entire thing, and thus the 10,000 people in Silo will be left in darkness forever. Knox greenlights the mission but tells his team that they need to get it done carefully. They will lift the panels of the generator to reveal the rotor. Knox will power down the generator. Juliet will go up and see what's wrong, signal Knox, and that's when he will close the valve. Their 30 minutes will thus begin. Juliet chooses Cooper to be with her because she knows that he understands the generator, and it's functioning just as well as she does. 8 hours of backup have been sanctioned. At exactly 10 p.m., the backup power is turned on, and for a split second, the screens in Silo turn off to reveal the greenery outside before going completely dark. The people have no idea what they just saw, so they disregard it, although they're taken aback. The camera, at ground level, must have rebooted before turning off. The silo is in complete darkness except for the moonlight. The process begins. The panels are removed. Juliet and Cooper are sent up, and they spot that one of the rotor bladed has been damaged. Cooper tries to tie the heavy blade to a rope to send it down to be repaired, but it slips from his hands and falls straight down many levels. No one is hurt. The repair team picks it up, takes it away, and starts working on it. Up in the rotor section, Juliet and Cooper start working on the damaged insides. That's when Knox's assistant informs Knox that they do not even have 30 minutes, as the valve in the containment chamber is heating up faster than they had expected. A few minutes is all they have. Knox screams to Juliet that she and Cooper need to get down. He needs to open the valve so that it doesn't blow up. But if he opens the valve without reinstalling the rotor blade, the generator will malfunction big time and could even be destroyed. Juliet realizes that the only way to cool the valve is to physically go inside the containment chamber and use a water hose. And that's exactly what she does. The temperature is very high inside the chamber, but Juliet knows she has to do it. She tells Cooper to do the needful quickly but carefully and goes down to head inside the chamber. She then starts blowing water at the valve using the hose, and the temperature starts to decrease. Knox tells his guys to work faster. The repaired blade is sent up, but Cooper has trouble reattaching it. The chamber is filling with water, and it seems that the temperature is on the rise again. Some of the pipelines start giving up and blowing up. That's when Cooper yells that he's done it. The blade has been reattached to the rotor. Knox immediately tells his assistant to bring out Juliet, who has almost drowned in the chamber. Cooper comes down, Juliet is pulled out, and the hatch of the chamber is closed. Knox finally opens the valve, and the generator is turned on. Everyone is waiting with bated breath to listen to it as it powers up. Soon, the loud, familiar sound fills up the entire room, and the silo lights up. Everybody exults and hugs each other. They have managed to save the silo and everyone in it. The next day, Juliet goes back to Martha's workshop and apologizes to her for how she behaved earlier. She then gives Martha a relic that George found so that she can repair it. It is a camcorder. Meanwhile, the engraving at the back of Halston's badge says truth. This is the signal that Halston had promised to give her if he found anything from George's relics. So there has to be a reason why he chose Juliet to be the sheriff. She leaves the mechanical department and is on her way up. Bernard meets Ruth and Sam and asks them about the darkness in the silo the previous night, and is told that the generator has been repaired. Surprisingly, he knows that Ruth made a deal with Juliet and warns her yet again of the consequences. Later on, we see Ruth signing the document declaring Juliet the next sheriff. She doesn't seem to be feeling well, and she tells Sam that she needs to use the restroom before heading to her apartment. She goes inside, and a minute later, Sam hears her fall. He breaks into the restroom and finds Ruth on the ground, choking on her own blood. Did she have any disease? Or was she poisoned? Silo episode 3 ends with Sam screaming for help as his wife writhes in pain. We have to wait and see if Ruth is able to make it or not. Juliet is about to take charge as the sheriff, and she needs Ruth's help. Also, there is the camcorder that Martha will surely repair, and God knows what footage it will reveal. If Ruth was poisoned, we can be sure that either Bernard or Sims had something to do with it. But why didn't they want Juliet to be the sheriff? Do they know something about her? And who is Judge Meadows? Silo Episode 4 has a lot to answer for. Silo Episode 3 moves at breakneck speed. While we do not know much about the mystery behind George's tunnel, we realize just how strong a woman Juliet is and that she is absolutely worthy of being the sheriff. We also find out a lot about the generator and how it keeps Silo alive, which is important for the plot's very essence. Also, we get hints of what we can expect, which prepares us for it. In the first 3 episodes of Silo, Juliet Nichols came off as a person who didn't express herself much, but from the look on her face, you could tell that her life had not been easy. Her father was a doctor, and it was very unlikely that anybody would do what she had done. She had joined the mechanical division, and it not only meant choosing a different career than your father, but also voluntarily bringing down one's social status. The levels of the silo were like class hierarchy, where the ones on the topmost level were considered to be superior to the ones living down below. We always had a hint that something of that sort might be a common practice, just like in any other human settlement. But in Silo Episode 4, we got a clear idea of how much class discrimination was there in this dystopian society. Sandy, who was the sheriff's assistant, gave Juliet a really hard time because she considered her to be unworthy of the position, as she came from the lower levels. But Juliet was thick-skinned, and she didn't let all these things get to her mind. She had realized that she didn't have an ally, and if she needed to find the truth about George Wilkins' death, she would have to be a part of the system and try to bring some people on her side. Bernard Holland and Sims had gone to meet Deputy Marnes, who was mourning the loss of his friend and mayor of Silo, Ruth Jones. Deputy Marnes was very sure that Ruth had been poisoned, and he wanted to find the murderer and kill him with his own hands. Bernard told Juliet that until elections were held again, he was the acting mayor, and that he would swear her in as the sheriff so that she could take charge of the pending matters straight away. Both Sims and Bernard didn't want Juliet to be the sheriff, but destiny had planned something else for her. A girl from the lower levels had climbed the ladder and made her way to the top, and the residents were shocked, as it was not very often they witnessed such a classic underdog story. In the previous episode, when Mayor Ruth Jones went to meet Dr. Pete, it became quite evident that he was not in touch with his daughter, and talking about her made him very uncomfortable. Their relationship had taken a hit after Juliet's younger brother and her mother left them forever. Dr. Pete was himself suffering from the trauma, and there were times when he couldn't be there for Juliet. Juliet was merely 13 years old, and she was expected to take on responsibilities and do things that she had never done, and neither had any child at Silo. Dr. Pete was mostly busy with his clinic and patients, and he asked his little daughter to gather all the stuff that belonged to her mother and brother and hand it over to the recycling division, as that was the designated place in Silo where all the extra stuff went. Juliet felt like she had to go through the trauma all over again. That night, when her father came back from work, she got extremely angry at him and told him how unfair it was for her to deal with all that stuff alone. Juliet felt alone, and it frustrated her that her father still prioritized his work and didn't think that it was important to be with her until they got better at dealing with stuff. Dr. Pete loved his daughter, and he knew that he was not able to fulfill his duties as a father because he, too, was grieving the loss of his wife and son, and he had become inept in dealing with his own emotions. He couldn't provide her with the emotional support that she craved, and neither was he able to fill the void that had been created after they suffered the loss. Dr. Pete had started expecting a lot from her to the point where she had a nervous breakdown and blamed her father for everything. Juliet just didn't want to think about it any longer, and one day she packed up her things and left for the mechanical division, in a hope that she would be able to escape her feelings. Martha knew Hannah Nichols, Juliet's mother, and she realized that Juliet had run away from her house without telling anyone. Juliet had brought her letter of permission, and she told Martha that her father wanted her to shadow the mechanical workers. Martha knew that the letter was forged, and she informed Dr. Pete immediately about it. When Pete came, he just asked Juliet one thing, if she was happy or not. Juliet knew that she was good at mending machines, and additionally, the excessive work helped her not think about her mother and brother. Pete decided to let Juliet do whatever she wanted to, and Martha made her the shadow of a young Knox, who later, as we saw, became the head of the mechanical division. Sims had met Deputy Marnes, and he had tried to convince him about making Paul Billings the new sheriff, and removing Juliet from the position. Deputy Marnes would have probably sided with Sims had Juliet not met him before and told him what was on her mind. In Silo Episode 4, Juliet realized that nobody wanted her to be the sheriff, and they were all scratching their heads as to why Halston had chosen her to be his successor. From Sandy to Bernard Holland, everybody looked at Juliet with a suspicious eye, as if she were a creature belonging to some other realm. Juliet knew that she needed to have an ally, and that is why she talked to Marnes after she found him fighting with a man on one of the levels. Marnes was mourning the loss of his beloved Ruth, and he just wanted to find and kill the murderer as soon as possible. He was not able to find any potential leads, and that is what made him even more frustrated. Juliet made a pact with Marnes and told him that she could help him find Ruth's killer, provided he helped with the George Wilkins case. Juliet also showed Halston's badge to him, which Ruth had given to her. The word truth was engraved on it, and Marnes realized that Halston had found some potential leads that he wanted further investigated. Marnes might have despised Juliet and would have considered her unfit for the job. But after that moment, he realized that it was necessary for her to be in that position, and she was probably the only one whom he could trust. It's intriguing how, just after Marnes told Sims that Juliet at least deserved a chance, he was attacked by an anonymous man. The man was hiding in his quarters, and he pounced on him as soon as he entered. The man took Marnes' gun and pointed it at him. Though we are not shown if he shot Marnes or not, seeing the fervor in his eyes and taking into consideration the circumstances, we believe that he would shoot and kill Marnes. The stakes would have been high, and whoever was behind the attack would have realized that it was imperative for Marnes to be killed so that the secret wasn't revealed. At the end of Silo Episode 4, Juliet found out about George Wilkins' missing file. Halston had hidden it from the judicial and kept it inside his cabin. It meant that Halston also believed that the judicial couldn't be trusted. The two people who had an immense amount of faith in Halston were now dead, and it seemed like a planned murder, probably because they were getting close to unraveling the truth or a part of it. Martha contacted Juliet, and she told her that she would need her help with a device that was probably a relic that she had recently found. That device might contain some information that would lead Juliet closer to the truth and tell her who was responsible for all the murders that were happening in the silo. Juliet also met a man named Lucas, and the way he approached her, it felt like he wanted to say something more. In the upcoming episodes of Silo, we will come to know what his real motive was for talking to the sheriff. There were hints all around Juliet that there was some foul play happening that she and the other residents were unaware of. Just when Juliet thought in the previous episode of Silo that she had found an ally in Deputy Marnes, he was murdered for some unknown reasons, leaving a lot of questions unanswered. To Juliet's disappointment, there was no significant information in Wilkins' file, and she couldn't understand why Halston had to hide it in the first place. Just then, a porter arrived at her door, and she came to know about Deputy Marnes' demise. Juliet reached the crime spot where Sims was examining the body with Deputy Paul Billings. It was no hidden fact that Sims wanted Paul to be the next sheriff, and obviously, because of the conflicting interests, there was animosity between Juliet and Billings. One thing became clear: Marnes' speculation was right. That is, the main target of the killer was not Mayor Ruth but him. Sims was quick to blame Juliet for Marnes' death, and he said that the new sheriff should have been proactive and deployed a few deputies to Marnes' doorstep. Then nothing of that sort would have happened. The mortuary team arrived, and Juliet asked them to wait outside for a moment because she just wanted to look around and see if she could find anything suspicious in the house. She found a list in Marnes' pocket on which Doris Kennedy's name was marked. Marnes had made a sketch of Mayor Ruth, which he had stuck on his walls, and Juliet noticed that whoever had killed him had taken that as well. Bernard was clear about the fact that he didn't want the people of Silo to know that Deputy Marnes was murdered. Bernard wanted to create a fake narrative to cover up what had happened, and he proposed that they could organize a race in honor of the dead and bury them in the same grave to make it look like Mayor Ruth and Deputy Marnes were lovers. When asked if he had reason to believe that they were lovers, he said that it was merely speculation from his end. But the accuracy of it made us suspicious about the IT department head who was now the temporary mayor. Paul knew that Juliet didn't trust him, but in reality, he had no intentions whatsoever of backstabbing her. In fact, he too wanted to find out the truth, and by the looks of it, he was an honest man who liked doing things by the book. He knew the pact, which was like the Constitution of Silo, by heart, and he didn't like it when people violated the laws enshrined by the Founding Fathers. Paul went to the judicial to check if they were suspicions of someone, and he got to know that they believed a guy named Ralph Melby had killed both Marnes and Ruth. He came back and told Juliet about it and asked to immediately take Ralph into custody, but Juliet had not realized until then that the judiciary was misleading her. Earlier, in Silo Episode 5, Juliet had gone to Patrick Kennedy's house, and she had found the missing sketch of Mayor Ruth and a box of rat poison in his cupboard. As soon as she saw that, she realized that he was being framed by the judicial, as whoever planted the evidence to make him look like the murderer didn't know that Patrick didn't stay in that house anymore. His new address hadn't been updated in the records due to a technical error, and that is why the culprit had no clue that trying to keep things in Patrick's old home would only expose him. Juliet immediately went to Patrick's house once again and found Douglas Trumbull from the judicial department standing there. Douglas wanted to be Sim's shadow, and he had been secretly given the task of eliminating George Wilkins and Deputy Marnes for some unknown reason. Juliet and Douglas entered into a scuffle, and he almost threw her down from one of the levels. Fortunately, Juliet survived, but Doug Trumbull was able to escape from there. Sims was disappointed with Douglas, and the kind of blunder he had committed didn't leave Sims with a lot of options. Sims knew that he had to make sure that Juliet wasn't able to link him to Doug and continued to believe that he had acted on his own accord. Sims pushed Doug Trumbull from one of the levels and made it look like he had committed suicide for fear of being caught and punished. After finding out that Douglas was responsible for the deaths of Mayor Ruth and Deputy Marnes, Juliet decided that she would visit Martha at the lower levels and spend a couple of days there. She told Bernard that she wanted to pack her stuff and bring it to her sheriff's quarters, but in reality, she wanted to see the relic that Martha was working on. The silo dwellers didn't know how life was before the earth became inhabitable, and they had spent their entire lives inside the enclosed space. They hadn't seen the trees, stars, animals, etc. And moreover, they weren't aware of the entire concept of recording videos, though they were aware of still photography. At the end of Silo Episode 5, while going to the lower levels, Juliet stopped in between to see what Lucas Kyle was up to. Lucas used to come every day to look at the night sky and see the stars. Lucas called them lights as he showed Juliet that they appeared to form a pattern and seemed to be moving in a big circle. Juliet was fascinated too, as from the lower levels, the view wasn't clear enough to see the night sky. Juliet reached Martha's, who showed her the camcorder she had found and was trying to repair. Both of them didn't know what it was called or for what purpose it was used. They needed a powerful magnifying glass to examine it, but Martha told Juliet that the pack did not allow them to do so. Martha said that she was always very curious to know why the founding fathers had banned the use of a magnifying glass above a certain power, and the use of lifts and pulleys to go up and down the levels. Martha asked Juliet why she was not quitting her job because she felt that she was not safe up there. Juliet told her that by solving the 2 murder cases, she had been able to win the trust of the acting mayor, and she just needed the correct bait to find out what exactly had happened to Wilkins. Though Juliet was hopeful, she had no clue what the real agenda of people sitting in power was. Juliet once again went back to the underground tunnel, and in the upcoming episodes, we will probably see her making an effort once again to find the door that Wilkins spoke about. We still don't know why Sims sent Douglas to kill Marnes, as on the face of it, both of them shared a good relationship. It might be possible that Sims felt that Marnes knew something that he shouldn't be knowing, or maybe he was close to finding the truth that would expose their corrupt practices and bring their foul play to light. On the other hand, Bernard looks like a straightforward guy, but at times it feels like he, too, is hiding something and trying to act naive so that nobody comes to know about his real intentions. Juliet was not going to give up so easily, and it is possible that she might find an ally in Lucas, considering he was also curious to know more about Silo and the world that existed outside it. Silo has shifted into the next phase of events, from the death of a sheriff to that of many more. Finally, we have ourselves in the phase of relics that contain the answer to the mysteries that lie beyond the Silo, maybe the existence of life itself. And just like the beginning of any phase, we find out about new stuff that the judiciary wouldn't want anyone to come across. Silo Episode 6 is slow and tests our patience till the very end, but we can accept that because we have made it halfway through. Now we have to see how Juliet finds out about George's death and Silo's secrets. Silo Episode 6 begins with Juliet and her deputies, including Paul Billings, breaking into Doug Trumbull's place to look for any strange evidence. Strangely, Paul finds the same relic that Juliet had at the end of Episode 5. So, it seems that she planted it there so that she could link it to Doug Trumbull and carry out an investigation accordingly. We must remember that she doesn't know that it was Doug who killed George, but she can easily hold Doug responsible for George's murder. But she cannot investigate on her own, and thus she and Paul bring the relic to Judge Meadows after he reminds Juliet that keeping a relic without the judiciary's permission is a criminal offense. Meadows doesn't seem to be interested in a closed case but appears unwell. She lets Sims proceed with the meeting and Juliet's proposal to start an investigation into the death of George Wilkins. Juliet shows Meadows the relic, but it is Sims who takes it from her. Sims is the one who does the talking, and we can tell that even though he doesn't like Juliet looking into George's death, he has to show that he cares. A reason for this is that Juliet knows that Sims and Doug were connected, so Sims has to acknowledge Juliet's claim to avoid being judged. But even then, he drops a subtle statement that puts Juliet in the circle of suspicion as well. After all, she is wearing a relic that belongs to someone else who is no more. George's watch that, as we find out, she fixed for him. However, Juliet is allowed to carry out the investigation, but she has to take Paul Billings along. Despite the image that I personally had of Paul Billings before he was introduced, he appears to be a guy who isn't controlled by Sims or the judicial, for that matter. Well, now that they have the green light, Juliet and Paul visit Patrick Kennedy yet again. This time, he gives them the name Regina Jackson. Meanwhile, back in his office, Sims, who had the relic with him, searches the digital archives and comes across George Wilkins. Juliet and Paul visit Regina Jackson and find out that she is George's ex-girlfriend. Regina reveals that George didn't have sanctioned relationships. He used Regina's family's influence to get hold of relics that would otherwise be tough to get one's hands on. The reason George never chose to have sanctioned relationships is perhaps because he didn't want to put the life of his partner at risk or compromise his mission. This, in turn, means that it has been a long time since he began analyzing relics. But more than George's intention, it is the fact that he never mentioned Regina to Juliet that affects Juliet. George used Regina, and from what she says about him, it seems that George lied about his feelings for Juliet as well. The mere possibility that this could be true comes as a shock to Juliet. Once back at her office, Juliet faces questions from Sims and Bernard regarding the relic that belonged to George Wilkins, her friend. She states that, besides the watch she is wearing, she didn't receive any relics from George. So, the question of how it miraculously turned up in Doug's quarters is not hers to answer. That's when Bernard, to our surprise, questions Sims about the possibility of Trumbull, who was a member of the judicial team that searched George's room, finding the relic and taking it back to his place. Sims is clearly upset with how a member of the judicial team is being judged based on a hunch. He doesn't want an investigation into the matter as it can lead back to him. By this time, Paul has realized that it was Juliet who planted George's relic in Doug's quarters. Although he doesn't open up to Sims or Bernard about the relationship between Juliet and George, he is very angry at her. She has risked his career for her own sake. Although it was wrong, we can tell why she did it. It's because she knew that Sims, being Paul's handler, wouldn't doubt Paul. But if Juliet and Paul are to work together, they will need to be honest with each other. And this means that Paul should accept that he has the syndrome, which itself is enough to cost him his job. So, we see that both Juliet and Paul have their share of secrets that can get their badges snatched away. So either they can work together or be sent off together. After leaving the office, Juliet meets Lucas, and they have a little conversation while Paul returns to his family, worried for obvious reasons. Not only does he not want the word about his syndrome to spread, but he also wants to ensure that he hasn't passed on his disease to his baby. Juliet decides to resign and tells Martha the same. Juliet remembers what Regina told her, and maybe George really isn't the person she thought he was. But Martha makes her realize that she took up the job out of love, and she cannot let her anger force her to give up. She has to prioritize her role as a sheriff over her anger for being wrong. Juliet returns to Regina's place and confronts her about giving up George to the judicial. Maybe Juliet had a hunch, and saying it to Regina's face works its charm, but partly, it's not the judicial that she gave up George and all the other relic dealers to, but someone else, a man who threatened to hurt everyone she ever knew. According to Regina, the reason George is dead is because he didn't hand over the hard drive. But what matters now is what he gave her in return for the drive, a file that has been passed down generations in George's family. The file is from before the silo. Baby Regina realized that both of them share the same pain of being misused and decided to help Juliet. Inside the file is a magazine with pictures of forests, oceans, beaches, and sunsets. Juliet doesn't know what to make of it, but if we place ourselves in her position, we realize how scary it is to know for a fact that there was a time when all the pictures in the magazine were real. Silo episode 6 ends with two guards observing her on one of the many screens in front of them, and one of them heads back to report to his boss, Whoever that is, probably the guy who Regina was talking about. Also, Bernard is surely planning something with Sims. Hopefully, Silo episode 7 will reveal if Bernard or Sims know this new mysterious guy and how he is related to all that's happened of late in the Silo. Juliet got the shock of her life in the previous episode of Silo, and she no longer knew who to place her trust in. Regina had told her that the man she loved with all her heart was just using her for his own selfish motives, and though she did not want to believe her at first, her intuition told her that she was not lying. Juliet still had that travel magazine in her possession, and she hoped that it would lead her to someone who could tell her what exactly was happening in Silo. Her curiosity was making her restless, and her actions and intentions were no longer hidden from the people who were running this show. So, let's try to decipher in this recap who the people were who were watching the residence through the cameras installed in the mirror, and what their intentions were behind it. There were 3 names mentioned in the travel guide that Juliet had gotten from Regina Jackson. She knew about George Wilkins, but she had no clue who Gloria and Anne were. She did some background research, read some case files, and got to know that Gloria was in the medical ward, so she immediately went there in the hope that she would get to know something about Wilkins' death. But Gloria wasn't in a state to talk, and the judicial had ordered to keep her inside the medical facility and under strict supervision. Gloria was being fed some drugs, because of which she was intoxicated at all times. The medical attendant told Juliet that she would have to talk to Judge Meadows if she wanted to take Gloria outside the hospital. A riot had broken out when Juliet had gone to meet Gloria, and Billings couldn't reach out to her because she had switched her radio off. Paul Billings was very angry at her, as she had left him alone to deal with the situation. He didn't know what she was up to, but he was just done proving to her that he was on her side. He told her that he had covered for her when the mayor asked where she was. Juliet was apologetic, but she knew that she had to find the truth and get to know what was happening in the Silo. Juliet met Bernard later, who told her how he vouched for her even when Sims and Judge Meadows were totally against her. Although Bernard had supported her in the previous episode in front of Sims, his actions felt a little suspicious. It felt like he was up to something, but till now, there was no evidence that could prove that he was plotting behind everybody's back. One thing was for sure, Bernard was not who he pretended to be, and he knew a lot more than he was revealing. Juliet went to meet Meadows at her house, as she was not coming to her office because of some health issues. To Juliet's disappointment, Meadows told her that she couldn't go against her order, and that she couldn't take Gloria out of the medical facility. Meadows was not in good shape, and she almost broke down in tears while telling Juliet that she didn't know anything about the people she was dealing with or what they were capable of. Juliet tried asking Meadows who these people were that she was referring to, considering the judge was above everybody else. Meadows abstained from giving any sort of information, and she asked Juliet to leave immediately. One thing that became very clear after this confrontation was that Meadows was helpless and was not acting on her own accord. She might have seemed like an evil person in the earlier episodes of Silo, but it was just because she was merely carrying out the orders. At this point in time, it had become clear that the Sims was keeping an eye on everybody through the hidden cameras installed in the mirror. Sims knew that nobody would ever come to know about it, as they were unaware that something like a camera existed in the world. There was a reason why anyone who didn't want these people to know what they were up to kept flowers in front of the mirror. But Juliet didn't know that, and she was stranded in the dark, clueless about which direction to go in. After her request was put down by Judge Meadows, Juliet went to her father because she knew that he too had access to the medical division and could probably help her bring out Gloria Hildebrandt for a while so that she would be able to question her once the effect of her medicines wears off. Dr. Pete Nichols was hesitant at first because he knew that he would be breaking the law and going against the orders of the judicial. But Juliet was not ready to take no for an answer. Pete told her that the implications of her actions could be really bad, but Juliet was ready to take the risk. Pete agreed, and he brought Gloria out of her ward and gave her the antidote so that she would come back to her senses. Gloria got paranoid as soon as she saw Pete standing in front of her, and she started saying that he was the one who had made sure that she never got pregnant. Juliet was confused, as she had no clue what had happened with Alison Becker, Halston's wife, in the very first episode of Silo. Juliet might not have had a good relationship with her father, but she didn't believe him to be an unethical man. But after the revelation was made, she started questioning his integrity. Juliet asked her father to leave Gloria alone for a bit so that she could calm down and tell her whatever secrets she knew about the Silo. Gloria was a bit reluctant to divulge any information, But when Juliet showed her the travel guide she had gotten from Regina in the previous episode, Gloria started telling her why she was in such a state and what were these anonymous power yielders hiding from the residents. During the Great Rebellion, there were people who didn't want to forget their past, and they wanted to keep all those relics they had in their possession as a memoir of the times they had spent on the earth when it was habitable. This group of people referred to themselves as the Flamekeepers, and ever since then, they have passed on the information from generation to generation. Gloria was one of the last Flamekeepers, and she told Juliet that she had given that book to George Wilkins' mother, Anne, who was also a part of the rebel group. She told Juliet that she knew about her mother, Hannah, and though she wasn't really a part of their close-knit circle, she had the same curiosity to know about the outside world as them. Gloria said that when she heard about Hannah Nichols' suicide, she felt like she had lost one of her own. Hannah had died under mysterious circumstances, and Gloria told Juliet that there were a lot of things she didn't know about her mother. Juliet was a bit surprised when Gloria told her that Halston had visited her in the hospital, and he had specifically told her to always put flowers in front of the mirror. It struck Juliet that Halston was trying to tell them something, as he had left her a note that said a similar thing. Juliet realized that there was something installed in the mirror through which the judicial was able to keep a watch on them at all times. She quickly covered the mirror as she had a hunch that Halston might have hidden something in the air duct here as well, like he had in the sheriff's quarter. Juliet opened the air duct, and she finally found the hard drive that she was searching for all this while. Meanwhile, Sims realized that he would have to send a force to take Juliet into custody, as she had become a threat to the regime. She knew too much, and they couldn't afford for her to be so curious. By default, Juliet was now a Flamekeeper, and Gloria asked her to escape before the forces arrived. Silo Episode 7 ending makes us think about what Gloria would have gone through for all those years. Imagine the amount of frustration that Lady and many other Flamekeepers like her would have had, and how claustrophobic they would have felt living inside the silo. They had an idea of how the earth was before it became uninhabitable. Gloria had seen the pictures of the trees, birds, animals, and water bodies among other things, and multiple times she had imagined herself standing on the beach, feeling the fresh breeze, and just marveling at the creation of the Almighty. Gloria knew that the judicial would never let her have a baby, and that is why she intentionally pushed her husband away from her life so that he could build a family with some other woman. She loved her husband, and years later, after their separation, they bumped into each other, and he completely ignored her. Her husband hated her, and that was exactly what she had wanted. She knew that if she had told him the truth, he would have sympathized with her and never left her side. Gloria didn't want that, and that is why she made herself the villain, even though it killed her from within to hurt a man she dearly loved. That was the sacrifice she had made, and she didn't want it to go in vain. Juliet is currently on the run, but we don't think that Juliet will be able to hide for long. She had the hard disk, and she had an idea about what the judicial was up to, and those things were enough to make her an enemy of the regime. The upcoming episodes will divulge more secrets and tell us what will happen to Juliet if and when she gets caught by Sims. We believe that if she gets caught, she will be sent out for cleaning as a punishment, and it would be intriguing to see if she finds something more than what her predecessors did, or if she too perishes like them. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and I hope you enjoyed the Silo story.